Greetings, Holly Springs United Methodist Church and friends. Today's text is found in Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 9. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost." The word of God for the people of God. A man up a tree without a prayer. When I was younger, much younger, my uncle had made me a set of pole climbing spikes so I could climb trees for deer hunting. This was a lot easier in those days because the early climbing stands were very big and bulky, and sometimes they could slip. The problem with using the pole climbers is comfort. Once you've climbed a tree, you need to find a comfortable limb that you could sit on for hours. On one occasion, I was hunting on Trey Mountain in northern White County. I had gone high up on a ridge, and I had found this very good trail for bear and deer. I looked around and I found a good tree with a low fork, which is unlike most trees on the mountain. So I thought, if I can get up into that tree, I can just stand there and I'll have a comfortable place to hunt from. There was one problem. This tree was quite big around. And so I lacked, at this point, the ability to use another very important piece of equipment. That's a leather strap that a climber will use to basically shimmy up the pole, or in this case a tree, keep your stability and keep from falling. Well, I decided to try it anyway without the leather strap. It worked fine going up, but coming down was an entirely different story. I realized that after I was up the tree that I had put myself in a dangerous situation. There I was without any way to provide stability as I needed to come down from the tree. I was up there without a prayer. Well, maybe prayer was really the only thing that I had going for me. I was stuck up there for a while, and then finally I decided, well, you might as well make the best of it. No one else was up there to help me. And so I had to hold on kind of in a bear hug fashion and come down the tree, basically sliding and tearing up my forearms as I was going. Well, Zacchaeus was another man up a tree. Once again, we're traveling with Jesus in Luke 19, and Jesus was passing through the city of Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. Passover was coming, and plenty of people were out on the road traveling at that time. So there were large crowds present in Jericho as Jesus passed through. And there was a man named Zacchaeus, and he wanted to see Jesus And so as he passed through town, he did something quite unusual for an adult to do back then. He decided to climb a tree. You don't usually think about grown men climbing trees, especially back then. I think back to the movie Gandhi, and I always think when I see the scene of Gandhi on his Great Salt March, these little boys up in the top of a tree so that they could see him. So here Zacchaeus is, a grown man, climbing a sycamore fig tree. Sycamore figs were pretty common. They're sweet and aromatic and provide a fruit that grows close to the bark. But for Zacchaeus, what he needed was some low limbs, and so a sycamore has that, and he was able to climb to the top of the tree. So Zacchaeus had run ahead from everyone and climbed a tree. You have to ask yourself, what puts a man up a tree in a situation like this? What made Zacchaeus want to see Jesus so badly? Maybe Zacchaeus was a man up a tree without a prayer. Maybe he was a desperate man. Did you hear in the news this week the world's dirtiest man died at age 94, not long after taking his first bath in 60 years? He was known as Uncle Haji, an Iranian term of endearment for an older person. He had chosen not to bathe for fear that soap and water would make him sick. He was covered with soot, and he lived in a cinder block shack that was built by the people in his village. Despite the fact that this man's conditions were as bad as they were, he still had friends. He still had people who cared for him. Now, we're not so sure that Zacchaeus had any friends. If he did, they probably weren't many. As children, we hear the song, Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He couldn't see over the crowd, and he couldn't find a way to get up front. Nobody was going to give him a break so that he could get to the front of the line. Some scholars believe that this Greek word used here actually means that Zacchaeus had a lack of stature in his community. But that could mess up the whole idea of the children's song that Zacchaeus was a wee little man. So Zacchaeus was short. We have already established in previous texts from Luke that tax collectors were looked down upon, hated by others. In Luke's gospel, they always seem to be in the exact same place as sinners and prostitutes. So not only was Zacchaeus one of them, sinners, he was also a chief tax collector. He was involved in recruiting and over other tax collectors. And they collected a number of taxes. So Zacchaeus was at the top of the ring that enabled the oppressive foreign government of Rome to be over the people of Israel. And he had gotten rich doing it. Luke is basically telling us that the standards of an upright, faithful Jew, that this man had all the strikes against him. He was a tax collector. He was in charge of all the other tax collectors, and he was wealthy from over-collecting on his neighbors. No wonder they wouldn't let him at the front of the line. For some reason, this man, who didn't have a prayer for ever being a good, acceptable Jew in his synagogue or a good neighbor in his town, was desperate enough to climb a tree just so he could see Jesus. But more importantly, Jesus saw him. Jesus saw him and told him to come down immediately. Not because Jesus was embarrassed for him, this small man in a tall tree. Jesus said, I'm going to your house today. I'm going to sit at your table to break bread with you, Zacchaeus. In just a few minutes, I am going to be in your home. You came to see me, but in fact, I came to see you. Zacchaeus came down quickly and welcomed Jesus. Now this got everyone upset. They muttered, Jesus is going to do what? Yeah, he's really going to that guy's house. Yeah, that guy. That guy who has cheated me. Cheated you. For himself and for Rome. That guy. Well, of all people. That little short sinner. Sometimes I just don't understand Jesus, was probably the response of many in the crowd. Now, Zacchaeus stood up straight and looked Jesus square in the eyes and said, Lord, I am from this point on giving half of my possessions to the poor, and the other half I'm going to repay everyone I've defrauded. By law, he was only required to pay back the property plus 1/2 of its value. But Zacchaeus went way beyond the law's requirement and decided to repay each and every person 4 times the amount. Now, Jesus not demanded this from Zacchaeus. So what brought about this change? Well, let's back up the story for a moment. The Broadman commentary says, no other story gives more evidence of this remarkable liberty exercised by Jesus in his association with people. Jesus boldly says to Zacchaeus, I am going to your house. Jesus treated this man as a human being, a person created in the image and likeness of God. And as a result, Zacchaeus repented and performed restitution. A changed heart resulted in changed actions. The backdrop to this interaction between Jesus and the rich is the rich young ruler in the previous chapter. He was a person who had done almost everything right. He was an upstanding example in his community. But Jesus knew his heart, and there was another God in his life, and it was the God of wealth. And when Jesus gave him an opportunity, he turned and walked away. But not Zacchaeus. He knew this man, Jesus, offered him a prayer and a chance at salvation. Isn't it always the case that when Jesus meets us, he treats us and finds us just as we are? And so Jesus never looks down at Zacchaeus, nor does he on you or me. Jesus stopped to save one more lost sheep of Israel. One more lost sons of Abraham had been restored. Zacchaeus, the despised tax collector. This real-life incident stands alongside of the parable of the prodigal son as a reminder of God's amazing grace and to what length Jesus will go to save the lost. What's not to love about this story, so charming and beloved that it's even a favorite children's song? The thing for us is, what do we do with it? We can only be one of 3 places when we find ourselves confronted with this story. We can either be 1, Zacchaeus, and salvation can come to you today. Or you can be one of those off to the side scoffing at Jesus and muttering. And you can open your hearts to see the needs of all humanity. And then there's Jesus. We can be more like Jesus and see others through those eyes of love and compassion. I challenge you today to think about each and every one of these. And as we go, let us Go in the peace of Christ and let it rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you are called to peace and to be thankful. And so I hope to see you again next week.